It's time for Michigan's newest sports talk show, Mitten Madness.
And here he goes. Defense win championship.
Michigan sports talk from here in Battle Creek. The latest stories, the biggest games, all across the Mitten State.
That's not something to play with.
Streaming live and on demand on the 95.3 WBCK app. Here are your hosts, Jacob Harrison and Da'Jzon Hughes.
Hello there and good morning. Happy Thanksgiving weekend to you. This is Mitten Madness on 95.3 WBCK. Jacob Harrison and Da'Jzon Hughes set to talk Michigan sports for the next hour. And plenty to get into, especially after Thanksgiving, where the Detroit Lions broke a, 7-year streak of losses on the holiday that they're supposed to own. And also getting to 11-1 for the first time in franchise history. It did not come easy, though. We'll talk about that, the game, more rivalry picks, as well as the Pistons and the Red Wings a little bit later in the show. But first, DJ, how's it going, man? How was Thanksgiving for you?
Thanksgiving was amazing. I got to spend time with friends and both sides of family. Got tons of food. Obviously watched my Packers win, so that was fantastic. And really just enjoyed the day. It's my favorite holiday, so I'm going to continue to eat on that food for probably another week and just reminisce over what just happened over the last 24 hours.
Yeah, I got the kiddos and the parents up here, and I cooked everything in my tiny apartment. I don't know how we managed that.
It was hot in there.
Done just in time for the last few moments of the Lions and the Bears, who are all sitting down watching that craziness unfold. It was a lot of fun, and props to Mother Nature a little bit, I guess, for letting my kids see the snow on the way out and stressing my stepdad out for him having us not driving it a little bit. But yeah, a lot of fun. Enjoying the holiday weekend, enjoying some much needed time off. But let's get into the Lions and the Bears. They'll have the weekend off after a exciting Thanksgiving matchup, and really the most exciting game throughout the 3-game stretch there. But nonetheless, the Lions looking for that first 11-1 start in franchise history. They grab it, but not without a little bit of controversy. And, you guys know we pre-record the show on Fridays, and literally as we joined the call to record the show, Matt Eberflus of the Bears was fired, and a lot of that had to do with that final situation. It's just one too many times where they shot themselves in the foot and lost a game that the Bears honestly could have and should have won. The Bears played fantastic football in the second half of this one, except for the final 30 seconds in which they're facing a 3rd and short a second and short, and get sacked. And now it's 3rd and long and the clock is running. Caleb Williams, gets sacked with 31 seconds left. They snap the ball with 6 seconds left. And oh, by the way, they have a timeout. And of course that pass goes incomplete on 3rd down and ends the game. And the Bears find themselves at 4-8. And, you're trying to talk to your friends who are Bears fans or whatever, and trying to say, man, you guys have been so close to being 8-4 and being in the thick of this division race. And instead you're 4-8. And now your head coach is fired. The Bears have their own issues, but DJ, with the Lions, fast start, Jahmyr Gibbs fumble kind of shift the momentum right before halftime, where Detroit looked like they were playing perfect football, and the second half was a little bit slower. I mean, what did you see? What stood out to you during that game from the perspective of the Detroit Lions?
The first half was all about Detroit Lion football. They were out there, and they were actually running the football well. They were mixing in their pass well. Jared Goff was comfortable in the pocket with the pass protection that he was getting. But then you could see in the second half that front seven really, opened up for the Bears, and they got a lot, more pressure on Jared Goff in that front that offensive line. And that really made it difficult for the Lions to get into their offensive groove, where they like to be able to throw whatever at you because you're not really ready for either one, because both have been doing so well. They kind of turned them into a one-dimensional team and forced them to throw the ball a little bit more. And then we're getting constant pressure in Jared Goff's face, forcing a lot of 3rd and longs. That's how you win football games. And then it came down to, a couple questionable decisions in the end. I really think the Bears defense has done this a lot, not just this year, but the last couple of years at really making offenses uncomfortable and step out of their element. It kind of just showed that this Lions team does have a little bit of a flaw in terms of pass protection and giving Goff time when they're forced to throw the ball.
Yeah, and I think defensively, this was a difficult game for the Bears because something that might have gotten glossed over in the box score is how many defensive injuries they had. There was a drive where Zadarius Smith left the game twice on the same drive due to injury, and injuries all across the defensive line, linebackers. It was almost a body bag game. It depends on, the severity of some of these injuries and whatnot. And thankfully the Lions get a long week, on the backside of a short week. But, a couple guys did step up in those situations. Obviously, Malcolm Rodriguez returns to the starting lineup with Alex Anzalone out. He had a fantastic game, I thought. Al-Qadim Muhammad stepped up off the edge, which is something the Lions definitely need. I mean, they just released James Houston, who was a guy who looked like he might be able to grow alongside Aiden Hutchinson. That didn't work out. That was a one-year wonder kind of situation. Zadarius Smith obviously is a little bit older. He's playing fantastic. He's really taken the opportunity well here with Detroit. But I mean, for a guy like Muhammad to step up and make a few key plays throughout the course of that ball game was really, really huge for Detroit defensively. Because nothing came easy for the Lions in the second half. Things just got significantly more difficult, and it's not like the Lions were playing badly. I think it was just because the Bears figured out exactly what they wanted to do. Caleb Williams threw for like 34 yards in the first half, and in the second half was able to unload a bit for over 200 yards and significantly better quarterback rating and completion percentage, 3 touchdowns in the second half. Things really did go the Bears' way in the second half, and then they just kind of let it go. But you still can't get lost on the fact that Detroit is 11-1, and that is a first in franchise history kind of milestone. And, when you look back on the records, it doesn't always determine, you don't always look back and say, well, they lost, they won this game so close. They won this game so close, because the Lions have been so dominant throughout this season. They're really solidifying themselves as not just, champion or conference championship contenders, not just Super Bowl contenders, but Super Bowl champion contenders. I think they've almost gotten to that point where they've left no doubt that they're the best team in the NFL, and continuing to build upon this streak and continuing to do historical things from a franchise perspective. That only boosts the confidence that the public has in these Lions.
I think they're going to be okay. I think everybody has a down game, and really when you look at it, they got beat up on Sunday and then had to turn around and play again on Thursday. Thursday night football is such an interesting concept for that matter. But I think next week against the Packers will tell a lot about the Lions team. They're going to have 7 full days. They don't play again until Thursday, and both teams play Thursday, so both teams are going to be completely rested, get a full week off, and get to prepare as normal. So I'm really excited for that game and to see what both teams have really in retrospect to, moving forward. I think both teams are playoff teams, and next week we'll say a lot about the momentum of not only, the two teams, but the momentum of the NFC North moving forward.
Yeah, the NFC North with Green Bay picking up their win, that becomes the first conference to have 3 teams with winning records. Really looks like Detroit's going to win the division. That Vikings game on the last week of the season might determine that, depending on how well both teams hold pace through the back part of their schedules. And the Lions don't have an easy schedule the next 4 weeks, that's for sure. But I mean, the Packers picking up their win over Miami. Miami really struggles in the cold, and that was pretty apparent throughout that game. They could not run the ball. They didn't look tough. And that's how you lose Thursday night football in Lambeau. But the Packers, the way that they're holding serve with Minnesota and Detroit, who got off to faster starts in the season, I know for you that's got to be pleasing as a Packers fan, but this division race is really starting to heat up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're in a position to see a great race for the rest of the year. You have the Vikings, who seem to be still playing out of their mind and have a decently favorable schedule. The Packers are in a good space where we're kind of hitting our stride, where we hit our stride every year in this late half of the year headed into the playoffs, and the Lions are still dominating as the best team in the league at this moment. So I don't see how we're not set up for blockbuster end of the year for the NFC North, but also just for at least those three teams to go in and have exciting playoff games in their first round games.
If you're the Packers, you've got to be feeling very confident because you have the easiest schedule among those teams in the NFC North: Lions, Seahawks, Saints, Vikings, Bears. Whereas the Vikings are Cardinals. That's not an easy game. Falcons. That's not an easy game, though those are both at home. Bears on the road in Seattle. Packers on the road in Detroit. And for the Lions, of course, we know Packers, Bills. That's not an easy stretch by any means. You go back to the Bears; they're going to be rejuvenated, I think, after firing Matt Eberflus, because he was the biggest problem in that building outside of ownership. This race is going to get very, very close. All right, I think we're close to that break time, so we'll stop there and pivot our focus to the college football world, because it's rivalry week. That's what Thanksgiving means. It means you love your family on Thursday, and if they root for the other team on Saturday, screw them. It's time for college football rivalry week, and we'll dive into everything going on with Michigan, Michigan State, and more here on Mitten Madness 95.3 WBCK. Back here on Mitten Madness 95.3 WBCK, Jacob Harrison and Da'Jzon Hughes. And DJ, you said it. It's time to get a little bit depressed if you're a Michigan fan. Your confidence level cannot be high going into the Horseshoe to take on the number 2 team in the land, the Ohio State Buckeyes. 10-1 on the season. That one loss being a 1-point loss to the number 1 team in the nation, the undefeated Oregon Ducks. This Big Ten schedule really, really beat up on Michigan. And while, last week was a bright spot, putting up a 50-burger on Northwestern. Northwestern's not very good. Ohio State the week before went into their house and only won 31-7. One of the stranger performances for Ohio State. But the Buckeyes do come off of a big win over Indiana, kind of proven that Indiana was beneficent of a rather easy schedule, though I think Indiana might still be in. I think that is such a close call with the way that they looked at times in that game. But that's another discussion that I'm sure we'll probably have next week with a quieter slate. But nonetheless, Michigan, Ohio State, it's the game. Michigan's won several in a row, and Ohio State is ready to get theirs back, and they seem poised to do so, DJ.
Yeah, I think that this is going to be a very interesting game because, Michigan does still care about this game a lot, and it is going to be a game that is going to get every ounce of energy that Michigan has for them to go out and win. They can still play spoiler somewhat in Ohio State's season. I don't know what happens with the number 2 Ohio State if they lose to 6-5 Michigan, especially if it's by 10 plus points. I think a lot is said if that was to go down. I'm not saying that will happen, but that's something that's on Michigan's mind. You never want to lose to your rival, and and if you have an opportunity to ruin their season, and you want to take full advantage of that. So I think that'll be the driving force, but obviously Will Johnson hasn't played, in like 4 or 5 weeks. He's not going to play this weekend either. So I believe Jeremiah Smith is going to have a, check notes, insane game, most likely. And it just is what it is. You go out, you play good football and see what happens. But realistically, I'm expecting Ohio State to come out and do their best to bury us. And I don't even put it on the players. I think this one is going to be personal for Ryan Day, who feels like his head is on the line if he doesn't beat Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, he was lucky that he, wasn't on the chopping block last year after losing to Michigan, and just Michigan, taking pole position in the Big Ten, winning the national championship. And not necessarily everybody thought, not necessarily did anybody think that Michigan was definitely going to repeat or anything like that. It was a difficult reload situation for them with everything they lost off that championship team. But 6-5 was definitely not an expectation for anybody. I think Michigan's still expected to be in the playoff conversation around this time, and this game being a big factor on whether or not they made it or what their argument could be based off of how they played in it. But obviously, it being that far off, Michigan still isn't a lock to get a bowl bid at 6-6, especially if they don't look great in this game, which is a stark possibility. It's possible that Michigan keeps it close just because of the nature of this game, but it's also a possibility that Ohio State dog walks these Wolverines. I know people don't necessarily want to hear that, but that's the situation that Michigan finds themselves in. So they've got to find it within themselves to perform in a manner that 6-6 still gets them a bowl game, and they still have another opportunity, to go out there and compete and try to put a bow on this season with a strong finish, which would be significant, I think, for Sharon Moore, because if you're Sharon Moore, you don't want to have this ugly season and a loss to Ohio State. If this whole Bryce Underwood thing doesn't go well, that it's not a guarantee. That can be almost a death knell for Sharon Moore, because outside of his first technically unofficial win as a head coach against Ohio State last year, this is still technically your first opportunity at this without any outside influence or assists. This is Sharon Moore's start to his legacy at Michigan. So a loss to Ohio State does get that legacy off to a shaky start and might make it difficult to extend that legacy if things don't go well off the back end of it.
I'm going to pull that card and say, well, technically he's already got a win over Ohio State, so he can.
Right, but he's got
asterisks. I'm just saying he's got the room to breathe on this first one. And honestly, realistically, I think 6-6, regardless of this game, gets Michigan into a bowl game, and I think it's based upon the respect that the committee has for the Big Ten.
True.
If it's not the best, some years it's the best conference, other years it's the second best. It's never, lower than third. There might be a year where the ACC pops out, has a really good year, but like Michigan's a top 3, or the Big Ten's a top 3 conference every year when it comes to football. So I think just, going 6-6, and you look at it like they technically have a top 11 win. USC was 11 at the time that they beat them. You only lose by 21 to the number 1 team in the country. That shouldn't be an only, but that game could have been much worse. You go in and you beat a rival in Minnesota. You only lose to ranked Illinois by 14. You beat your rival in Michigan State. You only lose to 8th ranked Illinois by 5, or Indiana by 5. The Texas game is probably like the one true bad loss I see on the year at the moment. Yeah. But other than that, for the most part, they've done a good job at, beating most teams they should beat. I think they should have beat Washington. Other than that, I think that they've done what they were supposed to do this year.
Yeah, I think if you turn on game day tomorrow morning, you're going to hear Nick Saban talk a lot about strength of schedule and who a lot of teams have played when they're talking about playoff seeding. But I think even good old Nick has to concede the Big Ten is the best conference in college football this year, and it wasn't particularly close. The SEC did the old Pac-12, Big 12 method of beating up on each other and making it difficult for anybody to stand out in that conference. And usually that's the case. but so much round robin in that where, X beats Y and Y beats Z and Z beats X situations. That makes for a more competitive conference, but that's not where the SEC usually is. The Big Ten this year, though, with 4 10-win teams. Illinois was really good this year. Iowa was better than I think a lot of people expected, and I think they've figured out some things offensively. Washington and Michigan took a huge step back from being national championship contenders last year, but they still performed admirably. And I think if you put either of those teams in the ACC, the Big 12, they're contenders to make the playoffs in those conferences because they're 9-2 right now instead of 6-5 respectively. So I think Michigan's better than a lot of people give them credit for. It's just where their standard is based, because Indiana and Illinois aren't usually like this. Obviously, Oregon and those other teams come in from the Pac-12, and that changes the landscape, not to mention just the situation for Michigan. I thought heading into this new era of college football was going to be more devastating for Michigan State than it would be for Michigan because of the transition periods. But it kind of hasn't gone Michigan's way. And that's something that they're just going to have to they're going to have to compartmentalize it and put it into perspective for what it is and find a way to build upon it in the years to come. All right, we wanted to touch on the Michigan State game really quick because they've got Rutgers, and you talk about bowl placement implications. Michigan State, not necessarily a lock to make a bowl game at 6-6 should they beat Rutgers, but a convincing win, a healthy win, or just a solid performance could knock the Rutgers Scarlet Knights out of a potential bowl game and put Michigan State in instead. But Rutgers, not an easy team, not an easy win by any stretch of the imagination. That should be a really tight game between the Spartans and the Knights.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a really good game. They both test each other through the air in terms of how Rutgers likes to run play the offense, and then you also look at Wimsatt back there at quarterback. He's also a dual threat guy, so they use him well in those packages in terms of getting him some QB direct runs or some read options and those kind of things. So there's a lot to attack there, and we obviously know what Aiden Childs brings to the offense for Michigan State and how they've been trying to establish an identity as a team offensively. It hasn't gone as well as they thought it might have this first year, but I mean, they find themselves possibly in a bowl game depending on how things shake out over this last week, with a ton of teams across the country kind of sitting at that 5-6, 6-5 area, and who's going to be bowl eligible and who isn't. So I really like this matchup in terms of, I think it's going to be on the higher scoring side for a Big Ten game.
Yeah, a lot of teams there at that 6-6 mark or staring at it. And even here in the Big Ten, Washington, Michigan, Minnesota, USC, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Rutgers, and Michigan State, all within a victory of 6-6. And there's only so many bowl bids to go around. There's too many. I'll be the first to tell you there's too many bowl bids. But when this many teams are 6-6, especially in the best conference in college football, it's tough to guarantee that you're going to get a spot. So you definitely want to come out of this one looking good and on the positive end of 6-6 as much as you possibly can. All right, we'll take a break, and when we come back, it's time to talk about our friends over at Little Caesars Arena, as DJ put it before the show. The Detroit Red Wings and the Detroit Pistons next here on Mitten Madness, 95.3 WB.
Detroit sports fans, Wolverines and Spartans alike, this is your sports show, Mitten Madness, with Jacob Harrison and Da'Jzon Hughes on 95.3 WBCK.
Mitten Madness, 95.3 WBCK, Jacob Harrison and Da'Jzon Hughes. Let's talk about the pro teams out in the eastern side of the state that aren't the Detroit Lions. Red Wings and the Pistons both trying to catch their footing early on in their respective seasons. Starting off with the Red Wings, 2-game winning streak here for them. Win over the Islanders and the Flames in their past 2 matchups. They've got the Devils tonight or later today as we're recording. You already know the outcome of that game. Did drop one against the Bruins, picked up another one against the Islanders since last we talked about these Red Wings. Things still shaky, all things considered, not placing well in those power rankings or in early season grades to the first quarter of the NHL season. ESPN kind of giving them a C grade because there are certain things that are going extremely well. Cam Talbot in the net is having a fantastic season. They're playing pretty solid defense for the most part, but the struggles offensively, particularly when it's 5-on-5. If Detroit isn't in a situation where they have a clear advantage, they are net negative, and in a bad way. They're 31st in even strength goals. Only the Nashville Predators are worse. Like, this isn't a position that the Red Wings thought they would find themselves in. Like, this was the course of a long rebuild last year and stoked a lot of momentum and a lot of hope among the fan base and the city of Detroit because everybody's playing up. You know, the Tigers walked their way into the postseason last year and had a fun run. The Lions are what they are. The Pistons are coming up, right? They're a third of the way to the goal that we set for them on this show, just doubling last year's wins. But the Red Wings are still taking a lot of time to try to catch up to where they want to be. But there at least has been some progress here in the past few games, DJ.
Yeah, I mean, they're starting to, look to catch that stride. It's tough, but the thing is, in hockey, like, once you get that spark, it stays for a while. So it's kind of a long game sometimes. There's some concern because, it is 22 games into the season already that there's some spark for concern there, but you see lots of good things happening. You see Dylan Larkin is excited to be there and is as a captain, that's a very important piece. He always has something to keep this team going. Lucas Raymond already at 22 points on the year. That's within the top 25, I believe, in the league. So the pieces are there. It just has to all come together, and they need that spark, and it's going to come, and they'll feel it. And then this team will be what we thought we were going to see based off of the end of last season. But like I say all the time, every single team is new. It's different. Every season is a whole new team, no matter how many guys return. So that's what we're experiencing now, is that this is a new team that is going through the battles as a new team through the season, but I do expect them to get better.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think we've seen that a little bit, especially over the past couple of past week and a half or so. But something to keep in mind, because I don't think there's any reason to get very doomer about the Red Wings, not at this point in the season, because at the very least, they're holding serve. The Atlanta division is still very, very tight. Toronto doesn't have a huge lead over anybody. Florida is a little bit closer to earth than they were last year. Boston has had a tight start to the season. Tampa Bay and Buffalo are right there with Detroit. Sure, Detroit's at the bottom of these rankings, just ahead of Ottawa and Montreal, but nonetheless, they're still in a position where, even though they're not having the start they wanted to have and not replicating the start they had last year, they haven't lost a whole lot of footing in the division. Just 6 points back from Toronto. They've got the 2 overtime losses, no more than 3 losses more than anybody else in this division. And that at least keeps you in good standing, that if you can find yourself to kind of grow in your weaknesses, start to play better in 5-on-5 hockey, the hockey you're playing the most, then you can find yourself in a position where you can take advantage of the rest of the division. But it's worth keeping in mind, though, the rest of the division is thinking the exact same thing. Hey, we're all in this right now. Once we get things rolling, we can put ourselves in a position to break away from the pack, because eventually that's going to happen. And you need to make sure that you, Detroit, are in that side of the field that is breaking away and starting to make a push.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting how things speed up, because it is still so early season. It's really that new year and like late January, early February is when you see teams really start to separate themselves. So the Pistons still have the Red Wings still have about a month to really get it together before they got to really start to find that groove and make that separation. So like I said, there's some concern, but no real time to panic just yet.
As for the Detroit Pistons, just one win since last we talked. It was a little bit rougher of a stretch than maybe some people had hoped. Not picking up wins over the Bulls, Hornets, and Magic or at least not winning 2 out of those 3. A little disappointing, but again, this is a team that's got a long way to go, and the improvements that they have already shown in this season is not going unnoticed. Their ESPN's power rankings for this week put them at 19th, which is holding serve with where they were. And really there's a lot to like about the team, but a lot of it is on the defensive side, for this squad. It's able to keep them in these games. Again, just 10-point loss to the Bulls, 11-point loss to the Magic, 2-point loss to the Hornets. The most recent outing against the Grizzlies, we haven't seen the Pacers game yet, obviously, but still showing some grit and getting that buzzer beater win over Toronto. There's some things to like about Detroit, and I think just the fact of this season being what it is, just a let's continue to get better kind of season. I think there's a lot to like here about the direction Detroit is going in, with a new system in play here, to try to continue this rebuild, and everything looks like it's pointed in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Pistons are a slow grind as well, but when you look, like we said, we wanted them to get to 28 wins, and they're ever so closely getting to that. And if you really watch the way they're playing the game, my one strife is that we're running the ball through Tobias Harris, which that is kind of a little bit of a personal beef, so I'll leave that where it is, but we really shouldn't be doing that. But Cade Cunningham is filling himself out. Jalen Duren is still manning his post down low and is bringing that energy and doing great rebounding wise. We could get some more from him defensively and, offensively, but nonetheless, I think he's fulfilling the role that he's actually there to do. And then, Azure Thompson hasn't played at all this year due to injury. Bobby Klintman also hasn't played this year due to injury. So there's some missing pieces that are there. Simone Fontecchio hasn't played this year yet either. So those are pieces that are going to be able to help as well once they get acclimated back into the roster and getting some play time. So this Pistons team is in a very great spot to continue moving forward, but I wouldn't expect playoffs this year or maybe even next year, but the next couple of years after, this team's going to be competing for sure.
It's definitely a possibility. I think when you look at the way things are shaping up, there's reason to have, the thought in the back of your head, they could put themselves in a position to be in a play-in situation towards the end of the year, but we're a long way off of that, and they have to show more consistency against teams that are on their level, that they can beat. It's what we talked about a lot last week is, hey, you've got games on your schedule. This is not the hardest schedule out of the gate, and that's a big reason why you're 8-12 right now. But you've got to beat the teams on your schedule that are beatable. Once you're doing that, then you're instilling a lot more confidence into that idea of making a run later in the season. It will not be easy, but I think having a buzzer beater off a young guy like Jaden Ivey that you have a lot of promise in, Cade Cunningham being in the running for comeback player of the year or most improved, according to the ESPN short list. I mean, those kind of situations will instill confidence moving forward, but nothing will do that quite like wins will. All right, we'll take a break there. When we come back, it is time for our picks. It was a rough week for us last week, but that just means the standings get a little bit tighter between me and DJ. A lot of fun games with college football rivalry week. We'll pick them next here on Mitten Madness, 95.3 WBCK.
95.3 WBCK.
We're back here on Mitten Madness, 95.3 WBCK. Time to close things down with our picks. Rough week for us last week, you said, and things got a little bit tighter, DJ. Update us on those standings.
Yeah, you went 3-3, so pretty average. I went 2-4 and was very close to going 1-5. So I'm going to try and get things back together, but that leaves me with a 1-game lead. I'm at 46-34. You were at 45-35.
All right, time to really catch up.
Yeah, all right.
If anything can happen weekend in college football. Got 4 games from the rivalry weekend in college football, 2 big NFL games as well. And that's where we're going to start with the Philadelphia Eagles 9-2 taking on the Baltimore Ravens at the Ravens house. They're 8-4. DJ, this is going to be a really fun game. I mean, this is about as tight as it's going to get for either of these teams. And both teams are really hitting their stride. Both teams run the ball. If you like old school 80s football with athletic quarterbacks, if you watched the Eagles back in the 80s, man, this is the kind of game for you. Saquon Barkley taking on Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson versus Jalen Hurts. This is a fun one. Not quite a toss-up, though. The Ravens did open as a 2.5-point favorite. That has since shifted to 3 points favored for Baltimore. DJ, who you got in this fun interconference matchup this Sunday?
This one is it's a little more simple for me. I really regret not taking the Ravens last week. The Chargers really disappointed me. Jim Harbaugh, you are much better than that. But nonetheless, there's one thing that Lamar Jackson is really good at. It's beating NFC teams. He's lost to one NFC team his entire career. I don't expect that to change this week, although the Eagles will definitely give them a run for their money, and it will be a fantastic game. So if you got time on Sunday, you should be sitting and watching Eagles-Ravens. But I do have the Ravens coming out on top.
Yeah, I think I'm going to pop in on this game because you remember a couple of weeks ago when I was saying that Philly just doesn't seem right to me. Something doesn't fit. Nah, that's done. That's over. I'm a believer. The Eagles are ridiculous right now, especially because of Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley is outpacing Adrian Peterson's MVP season. That was the last time a running back won the MVP. And oh, by the way, dude didn't even put it in his contract for any touchdown incentives because he knew he was going to get sniped by touchdowns from Jalen Hurts. And yet he's still outpacing Adrian Peterson that season for touchdowns. Like Saquon is having such a ridiculous season. And I think the Eagles have kind of put together a full package here. This isn't even Ravens hate because the Ravens are insane too. I just think the Ravens are a little bit too banged up on defense to contend with the Eagles. I'm going to go with Philly.
Ooh, you're getting bold this week. I like it. All right. The other NFL game we got for the week is, once again, Harbaugh's coming up. Los Angeles Chargers going to be on the road this week. Mercedes-Benz Stadium taking on the Atlanta Falcons. Chargers 7-4, Falcons 6-5. Kirk Cousins and company has looked very well, trying to take charge of that horrendous NFC South division that is down there. Justin Herbert trying to chug along and catch up to those Chiefs. Will they keep their winning ways going throughout the season, or will the Falcons, even things out for them and have them both standing at 7-5 at the end of the week?
Man, this one is tough. The Chargers are going to most likely be without J.K. Dobbins, but they've looked really good against teams that are kind of in that Atlanta bubble where it's like, yeah, they're probably a playoff team if they could just get their stuff together, in that Cincinnati-Cleveland bubble. I say Cleveland. They'd be fine if they just didn't start Deshaun Watson on the season. Anyway, but Atlanta has lost 2 road games to teams that they're definitely better than in New Orleans and Denver, and losing by over 30 points to Denver. Denver is a little bit better than I give them credit for, but that's still a really ugly loss. My gut says Atlanta, but my head says the Chargers, and after going with my gut on the Eagles, I got to balance things out. I'm going with Jim Harbaugh on the Chargers.
Yeah, I'm taking the Chargers as well for a few things. Their offense looks really great. And they were on a 4-game win streak before losing by 7 to the Baltimore Ravens, who are among the best teams in the NFL right now. And the Falcons right now, their place kicker, Young Hoku, is injured-ish. They don't know if he's going to play, which means they may sign one at the last minute, but not having your starting place kicker in a game like this where it could be a shootout could come back to haunt you. I got to go with a safety pick and go with the Chargers.
All right, let's head into college football. We've got some insane matchups, and one that could dictate who's getting that 11 or 10 seed in the college football playoff. South Carolina, Clemson. Never has this rivalry been more important, especially for the Gamecocks, because if South Carolina squeaks out a win here, they could be one of those 3-loss teams that doesn't have to play in a conference championship, but still gets basically a bye heading into the playoff. If they win well enough, I guess, they could bump up from 15 into that top 11, which gives you basically a confirmed spot in the playoff without having to play in a conference championship. That could be huge for a team like South Carolina, who has been playing impressive football all season long. Even in their losses to Alabama and LSU were tight. And I mean tight. South Carolina is one of the best teams in the country, DJ, but Clemson knows how to win in these big situations, and they've shown it time and time again throughout this season. Not quite as bad as they've been in the past 2 years. Cade Klubnik is the real deal, and the Clemson Tigers have something special going on. Huge rivalry game in Clemson Stadium. They call it Death Valley. I don't think that's really the case. But DJ, who do you got between the Gamecocks and the Tigers?
I'm going to play this one safe. It's at home for Clemson. They're trying to return back to that stature that they've been known as. And this is one of those games that almost gives them like the destiny. Like they're controlling their own destiny here. They win this game. They go to the ACC championship. They win the ACC championship. They're in the college football playoff. They have to make it simple on themselves. And right now, that's what's standing in the way. Or I think they may need some help to get into the Big 12 playoff, but the ACC championship game. Nonetheless, this is a game that could cement them into the playoff, which means they control their destiny at home. Crowd's going to show out. They're going to win. I got Clemson.
Well, I mean, I'm rooting for chaos either way, but I don't know. I look at South Carolina and I just see a team that can compete with literally anyone. And Clemson is the type of team where, yeah, they've got that experience in these situations. Dabo knows how to get his team going. But this is a situation where I think Clemson cracks under this pressure and doesn't defend their house. I'm going with the Gamecock.
I knew you were going to do. You don't miss your opportunity. So
nope. Never miss your opportunity to say Go Cox on the radio.
Which this one's going to take us over to another game that could cause all types of craziness. The Big 12 is insane right now. There's tons of teams vying for those Big 12 championship spots to get into the possible 12-team playoff. Two of those teams, Kansas State and Iowa State. Iowa State 9-2, 6-2 in the conference. Kansas State 8-3, 5-3 in the conference. They're battling this week at Jack Trice Stadium, which is home of the Cyclones. Will they be able to come out with a victory and possibly get themselves into the Big 12 championship game? Or will Kansas State play spoiler and maybe some other craziness happens around in that conference as well?
The Big 12 is the crazy conference this year. I'll say this. I think what I'd like to see happen is Kansas State win this game, because I kind of want to see Colorado get that extra shot. I don't know what it is about them, but I want to see Colorado in a situation where it's win and get into the playoffs, and they need a lot of chaos in front of them, and they need Kansas State to win this game. Unfortunately, I think Iowa State has been more consistent throughout the season. Huge win last week against Utah. Utah hasn't been that easy this year, even though they're a lot worse than people expected due to injuries. I'm going to stick with the home team on this. It just seems a little too obvious, Iowa State.
Like you said, I want chaos so much. And as much as I would love to pick Kansas State, I'm going to pull out, an old saying here. It's probably in Tennessee. I know it's in Texas, but definitely in Tennessee. You fooled me once. Shame on you. You fooled me twice. Well, I just got fooled, and I ain't going to get fooled a third time. I'm going with Iowa State because Kansas State burned me twice.
Kansas State's been a bugaboo for us in these picks this season. The Big 12, really, in general, in that regard. All right, back out to the ACC for more potential chaos. Not necessarily a huge rivalry game, but two teams that wear a lot of orange. The Miami Hurricanes, number 6 in the land, 10-1, just that one glaring loss against Georgia Tech. Syracuse, big time Georgia Tech energy with a giant slaying mentality and a quarterback who knows how to do that in Kyle McCord, or at least he's learned how to do that because he's had a fantastic second half to this season. Syracuse hasn't always won all of these games. A huge loss to Pittsburgh back in October, tight loss to BC earlier in the month, but stacking wins against Cal and UConn, those are worth noting. But you said it before when we decided to pick this game. JMA Wireless Dome is something special out there in New York, and Syracuse has the opportunity to do something special and maybe even knock the Hurricanes out of the playoff picture if they can't knock them out of the ACC title altogether. DJ, it's the orange, it's the Hurricanes. Who you got?
I would love for Syracuse to win this game. I think the energy is going to be great. It's going to to be a very fun game. And the thing here is Miami's had some struggles with teams that can throw the ball and are going to be tough on defense. That is Syracuse. So this will be an interesting game, but at the end of the day, I think Cam Ward will simply just be too much, and Kyle McCord has a problem turning the ball over. That may be a problem again this weekend. I have to take the Miami Hurricanes.
Yeah, I do too. I think this is a huge opportunity for Syracuse to really disrupt the flow of college football this weekend, and I think they've got as good a chance as anybody at doing that. But I think late against Georgia Tech, you could tell that Cam Ward is good enough to be the difference. He's just got to have a little bit of help, and I think in the time since, he's been able to put in work with his team to show, hey, we're good enough to be in this situation. We got to be good enough at Syracuse this weekend to put ourselves in that situation. Cam Ward, I think, can have a Heisman type moment this weekend and really make a case for himself in that regard. And I think he's going to do that with a win.
Final game of the week, Texas A&M. This one's plain and simple. It's going down at Kyle Field. Winner goes to the SEC championship game. Loser does not. Number 20 ranked Texas A&M versus number 3 ranked Texas. Who wins the Battle of the Lone Star State?
When you brought this game up, I looked at it and I said, because it's at Kyle. And I know earlier this season, A&M lost a game at Kyle Field. They lost to Notre Dame, and it's been one of the more bewildering instances in college football this season, because after that, A&M went on a tear. They look like one of the best teams in the country despite going through a quarterback change and really a personality change offensively, because this kid Marcel Reed is a completely different player than what they anticipated this offense looking like. And then they lost to South Carolina on the road, and then they went into Jordan-Hare and lost in overtime to the Auburn Tigers. I think those are circumstantial because Auburn is a great team that just hasn't been able to finish games, and they found a way to do it against A&M at home. That place is cursed, like Nick Saban said. South Carolina, again, I think that's one of the best teams in the country, and they can compete with literally anybody. A&M has the goods, and they've been salivating since Texas announced that they were coming to the SEC to renew this rivalry. They want to get back at Texas the way they did when A&M was on the way out of the Big 12. A&M in the upset gives the Texas Longhorns a second loss.
I'm going to go with Texas. I don't know why, but I'm just doing it. So plain and simple, that's I don't have any explanation for it, which means we got a couple more flip games this week. There's a chance for you to take the lead. I've got Texas. You got Texas A&M. You've got the Eagles. I've got the Ravens. We both have Clemson, Chargers, Miami, and Iowa State. Get us into the weekend, sir.
All right. Coming up in just a few minutes, it's going to start that pregame show for the game. Michigan, Ohio State. The last time we'll have the Wolverines on the airwaves this season. If you want to tune into that, it's going to immediately follow the show. Tomorrow night, Sunday Night Football, San Francisco at Buffalo on the air. Pregame festivities get started around 7:30, kickoff at 8:20. We'll see you guys again next week for more Mitten Madness on 95.3 WBCK. Take it easy.
Join Jacob Harrison and Da'Jzon Hughes every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. for Mitten Madness on 95.3 WBCK. Miss the show or want to run it back? Stream Mitten Madness on demand on the WBCK app. Sponsored by airwaycashforjunkcars.com.